Hey, beautiful souls. This is Guy. Welcome to my Best of podcast. Now, this is something I've been doing, for 10 years since I started podcasting way back in 2013 with my former podcast, 180 Nutrition, the Health Sessions. And then, of course, I started this podcast, let it in, I believe it's like 5 years now. Wow, time flies, huh? So it's a bit of I don't know, if you want to come on a journey with me. Not only will I share 5 or 6 of episodes that stood out for me this year, but give you a little bit of insight behind each guest and behind it as well. So if you want to come on a journey with me for the next hour, please, I'd love you to stick around. The other thing I wanted to say about these podcasts as well is when I say best of, I love them all. I love all my guests, people that come on, the conversations I've had. They truly have changed me over the years, and I'm forever grateful for them. But for whatever reason, some of these pop out and may jump out, and there were so many I wanted to put in here, but just can't, because otherwise it'd just be too long, and you might as well just go and watch every episode this year anyway, huh? If you got the time. Hey, bloody hell. The other reason why I enjoy doing these is that it's an opportunity to self-reflect, look back upon the year. I think in the craziness of the busyness of it all, it's easily so many good things can slip us by without actually stopping and smelling the roses per se. You know, because in all honesty, I almost stopped podcasting at the beginning of this year. I just got to the point where I really pondered on it for about a month, whether I should continue podcasting or not. And I came close to quitting, which I never thought I'd say that, especially with the amount of joy it brings me. But what I found myself doing was going through the motions of it a little bit, because, the intensity of life, being a parent, but also running the Live and Flow retreats that we do around the world. I mean, we were in Portugal this year, which was pretty amazing, and Croatia and Zagreb as well, running a one-day event. I think we ran over 20 odd one-day workshops this year, myself and Matt here in Australia, plus I think 5 retreats last year as well. So there's a lot. And there was been quite a pace to it, and don't get me wrong, I love it, absolutely love it. That's why I do it. It's where the rubber meets the road. I mean, at the end of the day, there's only so many podcasts you can listen to on spirituality before you actually can want to action the steps and dig deep within ourselves to uncover what's underneath it all, and what is this crazy life mean anyway at the end of the day. But to bring it all back, after much contemplation, I decided to reset. I think I took about a month off podcasting at the time, and then jumped in, and I'm so grateful I did, because some of the guests I've had on this year have been, mind blowing, really, at the end of the day, and it still never ceases to amaze me. Some of the conversations I have on you. So I hope you're enjoying them. What was I going to say around that as well? Can you tell I'm speaking off the cuff a little bit here? But if you do enjoy the podcast, if you are a regular listener, please let me know. If you're watching this on YouTube, drop me a comment below. Even if you enjoy some of the episodes I've selected for you today and enjoy this best of episode, I love hearing from you guys. I do get to connect to some of you and meet you in person at some of our workshops and retreats, which is great. And who knows, if you're watching this now and you're going to come to a workshop or retreat in 2024, I get to meet you as well. Which we're going around the world again. We're going to be in Bali in end of June, running a 6 days retreat. We're going to be in Croatia towards the end of the year, which I'm excited for. Plus, we got some amazing retreats here in northern New South Wales and Australia that we're doing, and we're creating a new format around it as well. So there's lots going on. And if you do want to start to really dive deep, submersive, and be around like-minded souls, then come and join us on one. I have no doubt you won't regret it. Anyway, so shall we get on with it? Let's dive into my best of for 2023. Okay, first up, the best of is Christopher Dean. And Chris, I hope you're listening to this podcast, mate. Hey, anyway, back to Chris and why Chris is in here. Chris, I got to know Chris. He came as a participant in our 5-night, 6-day retreat at the beginning of January 2023. And just to give us some context, we hold 34 people in a retreat space. And generally, I haven't met most of them. Some of them obviously have come to our 1-day events, and then come on to a retreat and things like that. But I spoke to Christopher briefly on the phone, but hadn't met him. And when he walked in, along with the other participants, what was very clear for me was that this guy's done the work. Like, Chris is in his 70s. He's a very successful entrepreneur. He lives in the Byron Shire. He lives a blessed life. And like I said, clearly he's done a lot of work on himself and explored spirituality for a long time. That, for me, was obvious. So as a facilitator, when somebody like Chris walks through the door, I'm like, oh, okay. In some respects, in all honesty, it's a little bit unnerving for me, because here I am as a facilitator, a teacher, and then I can clearly see Chris has got a vast experience of wisdom as well. And one thing, what was evident straight away with Chris was, for me anyway, was the humility he showed in you. He really came in and was just a student, and for whatever reasons, he came to the retreat and was exploring which we end up talking about on the podcast anyway. So as I started to get to know him through those 5 or 6 days at the retreat, I was starting to hear about his story and his journey. And I was like, oh my God. And I'd be honored. I asked him, I'd be honored, would you please come on the podcast and have a conversation? Now, by this point, Chris had listened to about 5 or 6 of my episodes, because that's how we found the retreat in the first place, by listening to the podcast. And he was like, yeah, for sure, mate. And the podcast was amazing. It truly was amazing. And I recommend you go and check it out. What I love doing is bringing people to the mic sometimes that just don't do it very often. You know what I mean? It's great if you have Bruce Lipton or Greg Braden, on the show, which I've had, or Reverend Michael Beckwith. All these people got big profiles. They've written many books and things. But when you have somebody like Chris on, who's kind of silently going under the radar and doing so much in life, to come on and share his wisdom was beautiful. And the piece I'm sharing with you here has got to be one of my favorite answers I've had, because if you listen to the podcast on a regular basis, at the end I say, is there anything else you want to ponder on, or what do you think, and things like that. And Chris's answer about humanity and the way he breaks it down and describes it was just like, oh, I loved it. So if you haven't checked it out, now's the time. Let's go over to Christopher Dean. Enjoy. Last couple of questions for you before we wrap it up, Chris. The first one is, how do you see the future going in terms of humanity? Are you hopeful? Are you excited? Are you ready? Like, where do you sit on everything?
I'm an optimist, and I'm very hopeful about humanity. I think we are part of a very extraordinary time unfolding. I'm a great believer in this. It's a long story, Guy. It'll take another 45 minutes, but I'll go as quick as I can. That many years ago, when I was 20, just after that experience, I read a book, 1968, called The Star Seed Transmission. And I got together reading that book and a theory about where we're going as a human species. That time, there were 4.2 billion people on the planet. This book predicted there will one day be 10 billion, but we will never exceed it. This is 50 years ago, remember. The book predicted all that would happen until 2030. It's been absolutely spot on. This was a prescient piece of channeled work. The guy said I channeled it from the Pleiades, from the stars, and I'm telling the story. And in that book, he talked about the power of 10 to the power of 10 as a paradigm shift or a consciousness change. The smallest thing in the world is a hydrogen atom, physical matter. So we've got a proton, an electron, tiny thing. Not very much happens. But if you link up hydrogens and join them up, you get carbon dioxide and neutrinium, and you get, stuff, physical stuff. You need, and this is an approximate, don't get me scientifically bogged in this, but approximately 10 billion, 10 to the power of 10 of these hydrogens linked up, you have a paradigm shift available when they hook up and create the first ribonucleic acid, RNA. Now you've got a sophisticated molecule that can unwrap, make two of itself. It's a virus, right? It's a consciousness change from inorganic stuff to something that's now living. 10 billion strands of RNA that decide to get together and cooperate will create a thing called an amoeba. A single cell now has a nucleus, has a cell wall, has cytoplasm. It's a consciousness shift. This is a much more complex thing than a single RNA strand. And it's able to move around and eat and separate and, get on with life. 10 billion of those, the frontal lobe of your brain, this area is very intense. 10 billion cells hanging together, a heart, a lung, a kidney, a shellfish, a mollusk, a snail. 10 billion amoebas that decide to cooperate become a very much more complex creature and a much more sophisticated. It's a consciousness shift, paradigm shift. So go back to who we are, Gaia. Because the real answer to your story in my book is Gaia is the thing that is coming alive. Gaia is this lump of rock that manifests into our space that got fertilized somehow. We got fertilized with life. In this book, it said you'll go to every other planet. We'd not even got to the moon then. And you're not going to find any life on them. Bad luck. You're going to go out thinking, where is it? You are the one. You're the egg in the womb of the solar system that got fertilized. You got it. And your fertility is now manifesting. Everything is evolving and growing. And guess who the peak intelligence of Earth is? You are. Humans. It's not white ants and it's not dolphins. They are extraordinary intelligence and they're all part of this Gaia manifesting, of course. But you've got a stewardship role. Human beings are going to be very integral to the governance of this planet as we're learning. And so we now are looking at, having fucked up this planet for a long time, how can we restore and repair it? So go back to 10 billion. You said 10 billion of you humans, you'll freak out and think, oh, that's way too many, too much resources. No, there's tons of water, there's tons of energy, there's tons of everything you need. And you'll get to 10 billion, you won't get beyond it. And that's exactly where the curves are. I've been watching these curves for 45 years. They do not exceed 10 billion. So we'll get to that number. Excuse me. It said at this time, as you approach that number, we're at 8 billion now, you will start to see a web emerge. None of this existed in 1967 when the book was written. A web will emerge which will link everything with everything. And this will become a consciousness of your planet. And you will be searching for your origins. You'll be putting up SETI, search your extraterrestrial intelligence. You'll be sticking up Hubble and its equivalent, James Webb, trying to see what's out there. Where's mum? Where's dad? Where do we come from? What's out there? You'll start to connect. And this is actually Gaia becoming alive. It's the consciousness of the planet that will start to morph. And at 10 billion, it predicted, here, take my word on that, there's going to be a paradigm shift. There's going to be an understanding that you are not you, Guy, and me, Chris, and her, Mary. We are one consciousness. We are one entity that will start to travel through the universe, not in a tin can with a bit of petrol. That's a nonsense. I knew as a scientist that's never how we're going to the stars or get around. We're going to travel at this quantum level, at this experiential level where we will instantly be anywhere in the universe. And as I know I could be in Perth inside this woman's body like that, I know that we could be anywhere in the universe instantly and we can have full awareness. And that's our destination. So I don't have any doubt that humanity, we're better than cockroaches at survival. We can survive anywhere in the Antarctic, up on the top of a mountain, in the bottom of a crater. We're survivors. And I'll tell you another story. Pinker's done a study over 10,000 years. Humanity has never been in a better position than it is today. There's much less morbidity, much less death per capita, much better health, life expectancy, all these things, none of which you read about in the press. All you ever read about is the car bomb in Tehran where 12 people got killed. Oh, for fuck's sake, Guy, in the box of rebellion, a tiny little rebellion in China 115 years ago, 20 million people got killed. I mean, in relative proportions, we're much less. I mean, Ukraine's horrible and we're worrying about stuff, but it's a flea bite in a population of 8 billion compared to what used to happen. And there's been every 100 years or every 10 years they've done it, there is a lessening of violent crime, of violence against humanity. And that counts World War I and World War II. It's a very, very interesting study he did to show that we're actually, as a species, getting better. And our life expectancies are better and our opportunities are better. When I read that book, there was 15% of the world that had a middle class existence of health and education and living a good life. Today it's 60%. And that was predicted in the book, 60%. That's the biggest increase in wealth and sustainability in humanity that's ever been by far. So if we stop focusing on the negativity that is fed to us as a fear thing, you understand that, to keep you reading the papers, to keep Murdoch richer, and start to see the big picture is wonderful. And look where we live. I live in paradise. We live in this gorgeous world. When I travel all over the world, I've just recently been in Mexico and Italy and San Francisco. And yeah, I saw some poverty and I saw some sad stuff around the edges. Of course it's there. I'm not denying that. But what I saw was millions of people loving where they are, loving their life, living in paradise, but terrified to pick up the paper because they might read about this horrible thing that's happened on the other side of the planet. Mm-hmm. So where am I? I think humanity is going to do fine. I think we'll get past this fear-laden decade that we're in. And I believe there's a huge hope for us to become citizens of the universe, citizens of the galaxies. I've gone down the rabbit hole, by the way, from a total skeptic thinking it was all bullshit, like I did about natural medicine once and remote viewing. I'm down the rabbit hole of alien contact now and watching out. And again, I've had one tiny experience of seeing 3 little lights whizzing around in the sky that could not have been explained by anything than some sort of extraterrestrial, some sort of energy that we can't control. Amazing stuff. I saw that when I was in my late 20s in Sydney. But I see so many people having these experiences now. There's so much of this going on. And there are extraordinary stories about people connecting with alien entities and craft that can do amazing things, travel through the universe, travel through time, organic, people with alien contact. Now, they're not all lying. They're not all bullshit. They're not all crap. There's something in that. And while I haven't had that experience personally, I've got to stop being a skeptic. Like I didn't believe people could bend spoons once. And I've seen so much of that even though I can't, I don't doubt it. And that to me, there is this, it's a bit of a so what to all of this. So what? So who cares? I mean, it's going to happen or it's not going to happen. It doesn't matter. We just live our lives. We get through the day. But I'm an optimist. I think the world is getting better, despite, having some horrible things forced on us by Big Pharma and blah, blah, blah. I could give you all the bad stories because I know them personally. I got fucked over by Big Pharma when I did my tea tree oil business. And we had an example where they completely dishonestly treated tea tree oil, created a headline in Europe to make out it was a toxic, poisonous, dangerous substance. And it was such a lie. And they did it very effectively. We went from selling 90 tons of tea tree oil a year in Germany to selling 4 tons overnight. Wow. Because they knew exactly what they were doing. They wanted to shut us down. And it took me 3 years and millions of dollars of government help to prove that was all bullshit. And it was 7 years later that a director of I won't name the evil company based in Germany that did the work, but they deliberately set out to scuttle tea tree oil because it was too good, too effective. So I can tell you the bad stories, but let me tell you the good stories far outweigh it. And we should realize that. There's a lot of good in this planet.
Yeah. Thank you, Christopher. I'm glad I asked the question. I can see that being a highlight reel when I let people know this podcast is truly. That's very inspiring. I've never thought of it like that. Okay, next up, I bring you Heather Ivany. Now, Heather ended up coming on my podcast twice this year. The first episode she came on had a massive response. We got into her journey and the Akashic records. And what I loved about Heather, she was raw, vulnerable, and just bloody downright honest. And that's what it's all about for me. And she shared her journey intimately about overcoming many challenges to becoming an Akashic record teacher. And if you haven't listened to that episode, I definitely check it out. And then she comes on again. So I invited her back on the show because we are doing Akashic record training in January 2024. So if you're seeing this and you live in Australia or in the Australian time zone and you are interested in doing Akashic records training with us, come and join us. I'll put a link below. Anyway, the second podcast where we talk about that, she did an Akashic record reading on me, and we had a very incredible, more conversational style podcast as opposed to me just interviewing her, where she really brought out the best of me too in that episode. So I might be slightly biased here about picking this best of one, but anyway, and it's fascinating. I am truly fascinated about always up-leveling my skills, learning, and I felt like Heather brought something quite fresh to the podcast as well, which is great, right? So here we end up talking about the different ways of receiving information for our claircognizant skills, I should say. Anyway, let's go over to Heather. You spoke about there's different ways of receiving the Akashic reading, because I'm guessing obviously we have to get ourselves into a space to connect with intention. Obviously there's free will involved here. So if there's the free will of connecting to my own Akashic record, or free will is granted from somebody that you're working with as you train to learn this, what are the different ways of interpretation, and how do we figure that out as humans? Because we tend to receive information differently.
Yeah. So I bet you different teachers use different techniques, but when I was called to teach others how to access the Akashic records, and I was asking the how of it, what came through for me was to work with clair abilities. So the four main clairs that we have are claircognizant, which is your inner knowing; clairsentient, which is your feelings; clairvoyant, which is your inner seeing; and clairaudio, which is the hearing. There's also clairgustance, which is taste, and clairlience, which is smell. But I find whenever I'm sort of going, what I do before anyone comes into a training, I set up a one-on-one session with them, and we go through their clairs. So how I do it is I do an energetic body scan. I'll start at the crown of your head. And I did this in our session together. So maybe you can respond to it a bit to how it felt when I was pinging it to you. But from the crown of the head, we start to do an energetic body scan downwards. And I'm going through, okay, claircognizance. What's coming through? Is this person receiving through claircognizance? And if I get a yes, then I'm also getting information on the how, because people actually access the clair a little bit differently from one another. And I make notes on this, and I will sort of put like an order of first to third as to what is the strongest clair, and then what's beneath it and what's beneath that. And sometimes clairs work in partnership together. That's another thing to keep in mind. What's kind of tricky is that when you go into an Akashic training, or when I go into the Akashic training itself, because there's sort of the group pull that will support sort of an upgrade energetically in people, sometimes another clair ability will pop and become more predominant in the training than the one that was sort of outlined before we started. So it's kind of a guideline, but it's not an absolute, if you will. And then when I'm working, if someone's having trouble with an exercise that we're doing, I will look and see, okay, this person is clairsentient. So I'm going to be asking them, like, what is it that you're feeling when you're asking that question? What does it feel like to be in this person's records? Where do you feel that kinesthetically? Is it in your fingertips? Is it a whole body? And so by them, then they're like, oh, this is so natural to me. So they respond in their sort of natural tongue, their native tongue, if you will, through their clairability. But if someone's clairvoyant and I'm asking them how they're feeling, they're going to get confused because they're going to be like, I'm not really feeling anything. And then they think that they can't do it. And that's not true. It's just that I'm not accessing from the telephone line that's most predominant within them. So then I'll be asking them, okay, are you getting any pictures, any visuals? Does it come in sharp and quick and you lose it right away? Or does it sort of like a painting that's slowly being painted in as you linger in the field? So there's different ways that we play with it that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. It's almost like there's, what I find when working in groups, is that there's a level of awareness that gets heightened to then have an experience because of the group, the lift of the group energy. But then we have a new reference point that we kind of know what we're then looking for because we've actually experienced it in the lift. That's how I've sort of found my way through in time by being in groups. And that's why I'm so passionate about holding groups together myself with the work we do. And then from that, when I'm actually out of that group and I'm in my own little space with the practice, there's a reference point that I can develop that muscle to develop the awareness to access it, not from the head, if that makes sense. That's what I found on my journey.
So can you give me, so that I can be sure that I'm following along, can you give me an example of how that is in the group space? Like what would be happening in the moment that you're feeling and sensing and then expanding into?
Oh, now you're opening up. Yeah. Well, more lately it's been from working with divine source energy. So there's a level of energy that starts to come through, and from that level of energy within the group, I can feel my torus field. I can feel the expansion. So it's like I'm in my body and beyond my body, and that alone of that sense and being able to, and I feel there's been a relationship with my physical body muscle for it to become comfortable enough to go, it's safe, it's okay, when it comes up against its limitations, to settle in. So through being through that group, feeling into the group energy, distinguishing boundaries between my energy and the group's, it's that has been a development for myself, and I can sense it and I'm in it. So even then when I'm in my everyday life, I tend to hold that resonance, providing I keep the practices at a much more conscious level, and my boundaries become very clear and set within my world as I go around, and that becomes much more conscious, but then it becomes a habit at the same time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's really nice the way you shared the description of it. It's almost like you can recall it not on demand, but almost in the moment, because you have an energetic imprint of it. So you know what it feels like, you know how it landed in that moment in the group space, and then you recall it to come in and kick in. The same way, like if you isolate the hamstring when you're at the gym, and then you're trying to make your hamstring come online when you're running, you can feel into the muscle memory of what it feels like to flex that hamstring and ask it to kick in, right?
Exactly. And it becomes a spontaneous thing. And what's been really neat, and I'm slowly starting to talk about it more on a podcast, but I haven't, is that then through when you hold a really pure intention for a group or an energy, that energy wants to flow more and more within and merge with the group collective energy. And I always see it as coherence. So there's a wonderful little YouTube video out there somewhere where you see all these like pendulums just all incoherently ticking, and then eventually they become a coherent group where they're all ticking together. And I always see that in the space I hold, because then that's amplifying the energy even more, that really allows us to get beyond ourselves. All right. Now I'm moving on to David Bennett. And again, this episode, what got me excited about David, like he just speaks really well and really honestly. And I just connected with him. You know, he's got a good microphone set up. He's got his podcast gear set up. He just tells a story really well. And David, basically watched himself die. He was in the Navy and he drowned. And the way he describes everything and going on to meet the Soul family, like it's just blows your mind. And I thought he just broke it down really, really well. And by the end of this podcast, I remember feeling, wow, that was amazing, mate. And it was just a real privilege talking to him. It kind of reminded me of an episode I did very long ago, which I recommend to check out, with Peter Panago, who was an ice climber. And he had a similar experience. But enjoy this snippet with David. And if you haven't checked out the full episode, definitely recommend it, going back to it as well. I've had quite a few number of people come on this year now who've had near-death experiences. And I'm always fascinated by just the way they share it all. Enjoy. So how long had you been doing that to when your near-death experience happened?
Well, my near-death experience happened in 1983. And so I was probably the chief engineer of that vessel because it happened while I was the chief engineer. And I've probably been the chief engineer for a good, 7 years or so. Yeah.
So talk us through what happened on that particular day.
Well, it was... 1983, and we were evaluating a new remote operated SUV, remote operated vehicle, and a storm was coming in, and we'd seen that there was a storm coming in, and we thought that maybe we could beat it into the harbor because the design engineer for the sub needed to get to LAX in California, and this is on the West Coast. And we didn't quite beat the storm. And so we were 2 miles off the coast and the harbor master wouldn't let the ship in, but we needed to get this guy into the harbor. So we lowered a small boat, a rubber Zodiac, and we used that Zodiac to retrieve our submarines and stuff. So it was very durable. We've used it in heavy seas. So, we weren't really all that concerned. But the captain, because we were on a trip where we were evaluating a submarine, we didn't have our full crew on board, so we just had the engineers and the and the sub crew and that sort of stuff on board. We didn't have the full complement on board the ship. So the captain thought that it would be best, because the mate that we had wasn't too familiar with the harbor. So the captain thought that I should go along. And as chief engineer, normally I don't leave the ship. At least not for something like this. But this night, the captain thought it would be a good idea. And we went down to bosun's locker, put on some life vests, because there were 25 to 30 foot seas. And so, it was a rough night. And so we jumped in the Zodiac. We took our bearing on the harbor buoy, but 2 miles out. So we had to go up a roller, get up on the top of a swell, kind of get our bearing, go down the trough and get up on top of the next swell, do the same thing. And it wasn't long we lost track of where the harbor buoy was, but we figured, a Zodiac, we can land that on the beach. So it's not a big deal. We'll get this guy in there somehow, some way, and so he can make his flight. Well, we didn't realize the storm had blown us a mile south of the harbor already. And we hit this breaker zone about a mile out. And we drove right off a 25-footer. I mean, we actually flew off of this, because the Zodiac could really move. And we flew off the top of this breaker. And I yelled at the mate to turn us around, because I was in the bow trying to navigate. And just as he got us turned about and we're about to head back out to sea, another one came, and it was right over our head, and it broke right on top of us, and it folded the Zodiac in half. I was in the bow. It catapulted me into the ocean, but I'm a commercial diver. I'm trained, I'm a trained commercial diver. So I'm used to being in the water. I've logged 1,000 hours. I wasn't really all that freaked out other than, well, here we are. And so I hung on to, and at the time we had one of those old World War II life vests, the old Mae West that looked like giant orange pillows,
Yeah.
And, so I'm hanging on to Mae West, waiting for her to bring me up to the surface, and I'm being tumbled and tossed like a rag doll. And I'm waiting and I'm waiting and I'm waiting. And Guy, you can only hold your breath so long, and eventually I drown. And I found myself in this absolute darkness. And I was really curious because, I just came from this raging sea. And you live near the ocean. You know how loud that sea can be, right? Well, it was quiet. It was peaceful. It was calm. And I'm in this absolute darkness. And I'm like, what is going on? Because as a commercial diver, we're trained about oxygen deprivation and all that stuff. And this is way beyond anything that I'd experienced in training. And so, but I was very comfortable. On the west coast of the U.S., the water currents come down from the north, and this was in March. So water was very cold, but I was no longer cold. I was just very comfortable in this absolute darkness. And I felt like, there's something about this, because the black, they call it the void, but it feels like everything is contained within it. It's an incredible experience to be in this darkness, but not feel alone, not feel, and many people are frightened by this darkness. Many people that experience this can be frightened, but I just died this violent death. And so I was just very curious.
Do you remember your last breath? Sorry.
I do.
You do?
Yeah. Oh. That was not a pleasant part. And I usually don't talk about that because but it happens very, very quick. There's a burning, and then, when you breathe in the salt water, there's a burning, but then boom, I popped right out of my body into this darkness.
Into the void.
Yeah. Wow. Into the void. But then I saw this pinprick of light. Just this tiny little light. And I started looking at it, and as I looked at it, it felt like it was coming toward me, or I was going toward it. And as I got closer, I saw that it was millions upon millions of fragments of light. And they were all moving kind of in unison, like they had one mind. And it was just absolutely beautiful, and it was infinite. As I kept getting closer and closer and closer, it became more defined. And as I got closer, I started feeling these waves of love. It was like a warm embrace, and like nothing I'd ever felt before in my life, because I had a pretty dysfunctional childhood. So, a feeling of being embraced in total love was something I had no concept of. And eventually, these fragments, 3 fragments, broke away and came toward me. And as they did, they emanated this welcoming home. Just welcome home. And I still it still kind of gets me, because they felt like family. They felt more like family than anything I have here on this earth. And eventually there were a dozen of them, and they were all welcoming me. And they kind of communicated that we were going to go deep into the light. And as we went into the light, we went to this area. To me, it felt like a giant bubble inside a sphere. We went inside, and I started to relive my life. And they were experiencing my life just as I was. It was like my consciousness had broken up into multiple fragments of consciousness, and I was experiencing everything in my life through my perspective, but everyone I'd ever interacted through their perspective. I got to experience how they felt about our interaction. I got to feel, what they, how maybe it would affect them. It was incredibly humbling is a fact, because like I've said, I was a brash young man, very brash young man. And I stepped on a few toes in order to get to the position of being the chief engineer of this ship. And they were my soul family. I call them my soul family, these 12 light beings. And they were experiencing it with me. And tell you the truth, Guy, I was a little ashamed that they were experiencing this but they just loved me. They didn't judge me. They just loved me and supported me through this, this life review. But eventually I reached a point where I had gone past my drowning and I had gone into, I didn't know it at the time, but I was previewing my future. And it's kind of interesting when I crossed that threshold, everything in the life review was absolutely crystal clear. But when I got to that threshold of future, it was like I was looking down this corridor and everything in the center of the corridor was very much in focus, but there was also this periphery that was kind of out of focus. And I got the impression that this was, my future potentials, my future, where I could go down the central corridor and I would hit these marks. But if I veered to the right, I could, possibly experience some additional things, but I would always be nudged back to the center. So I eventually reached a point where the light, this infinite fragments of light, all spoke in unison. And I perceived this to be God. And it said, "This is not your time. You must return." And I said, "No way. I am not going back. I found a family that I feel that loves me. I feel love like I've never felt before. I know my body is broken in that ocean, and I have no desire to go back to it." And the light spoke one more time. It said, "You must return. You have a purpose." And that word purpose just kind of resonated in my being. And when we're when we're out of our body and when we're in this other state of being, we have more available to us as far as consciousness. It was like we're connected to all the souls that ever were and all the souls that ever will be. And so within this expansive consciousness, I understood that word purpose. I understood it. And it was so simple and so efficient. And so I immediately came to acceptance. And the minute I came to acceptance, I found myself outside of my body. I'm still in my light body, and my original 3 soul family members that greeted me are with me, and we're observing my body still in the breaker zone being tumbled and tossed. I'd gotten caught in that breaker zone. And I saw the bow line of the Zodiac come. My body came close to the bow line of the Zodiac where it wrapped itself around my arm, and another wave came through, and there must have been some air left in one of the pontoons of the Zodiac, and it popped up. And when it did that, it cinched that line around my arm, and it pulled my body up to the surface, and where I got tangled. And I'm observing this from outside my body. I'm watching this happen, and I'm just in awe. And when it did that, it dislocated my shoulder, but I didn't feel anything. Because I was outside my body just observing this. And then my body got caught up in all the lines, and some other waves came, and they pounded me up against this wreckage. And when it did, it pushed a little bit of that salt water out of my lungs. And that's when my soul family gave me a gentle push, and I found myself vibrating right back into my body.
Wow. You've triggered about 20 questions in that.
I'll bet.
All right. Next up, I bring you Robert Gilbert. And Robert, I first stumbled across him through biogeometry. Now, with biogeometry, we actually, here in Australia, as part of Living Flow, we distribute biogeometry. We import the products from Egypt and we sell them to the Australian market. That's what this is, if you're wondering. This is biogeometry. And Robert Gilbert is a dear friend of Dr. Ibrahim Karim, and Dr. Ibrahim Karim is the founder of biogeometry. And these are just, and I've had Ibrahim Karim on the podcast as well. These are just beautiful, beautiful souls that really want to educate and serve humanity on a bigger level. That's simple as that. And Robert Gilbert, I was aware he was teaching biogeometry, and then his TV show on Gaia, the Gaia Network, appeared, which is pretty phenomenal, by the way, if you haven't checked that out. And it took me nearly a year to get Robert on. He's a very busy man. And, you know, we got connected and we were trying to line up our schedules, and he finally came on, and I finally got to sit with him for an hour and meet him. And the guy couldn't stop smiling. Like, he was such a nice man. And it's like talking to Google when it comes to spirituality or something. You know, he's just got a way of teaching and articulating things and getting it across and breaking things down really well. And I just got off that podcast thinking, great human being. And I got a lot out of it. And I went back and listened to the podcast again. I thought, wow, there's so much here, you know. So I wanted to present to you, if you're not familiar with Robert and his work or biogeometry, I highly recommend you dive into it, and just wanted to share a snippet with Robert. Now, I am in talks, I'm getting him back on the podcast. Funnily enough, this episode with Robert is, I think, my second most viewed YouTube video. You know, it's up to 100,000 views now or something. So it's clearly people are hungry for this information. Anyway, let's go over to Robert. Enjoy. Wow. So where does sacred geometry fit in, and biogeometry? Because even for like, you hear them both, and are they the same? Are they different? Like, what's happening? And
yeah.
God, there's so many questions. It's almost like I just toss one in and let you go, because even with sacred geometry, I'm fascinated how that was a unified language for all the sort of ancient traditions and religions and cultures that you searched as well. And that was like the map, if you like. I don't know if you used the word the map, but
so
explain. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So sacred geometry is the kind of general overarching term that we use today in metaphysics for all the patterns behind creation. These patterns are often able to be represented through geometric forms. And so this actually works really well for us today because we're a highly visual culture. So to be able to express packed information with all types of different aspects to it through a core image that has embedded in it a tremendous amount of content and information is something that works really well for people today. And it's been done in esoteric traditions for thousands and thousands of years. So you find all these particular types of sacred geometry images from classical traditions that have a deeper meaning for the people initiated in whatever the temples were of that tradition. And then it might be understood at a much simpler level by the lay people. But it's possible to use images and visuals to be able to convey very deep information. So one idea is that the Freemasons from medieval times made the cathedrals in Europe as books written in stone. So embedded in the designs of the cathedrals is a huge amount of esoteric information. Now also, there's the aspect of sacred geometry, which is the actual energy patterns behind everything in physical manifestation. Because to manifest something into physical reality, you first have to create a particular pattern in energy, and that becomes then the blueprint through which the crystallization process of that energy pattern into physical matter will actually happen. And so that's true, for example, with the human physical body. It's based on an energy blueprint, and the physical matter just fills in the energy pattern. And in general, we could say that sacred geometry is the study of patterns. whether it's of the actual patterns behind physical manifestation, because there's a pattern behind every chemical in the periodic table, behind every stone on the earth, behind every organ in the human body. Everything has a pattern. When it loses the core pattern, that's when illness sets in. If you can restore the core pattern, then you have what we think of as health, because that's the proper functioning. Any distortion in the pattern creates problems for whatever the system is. The stone will fall apart, the house will fall apart, your mind will fall apart, your organs will fall apart, yet the pattern doesn't hold its particular integrity. But understanding sacred geometry as a study of patterns, it can be applied to anything from constructing physical matter, which is what we do with nanotechnology today. We're constructing matter molecule by molecule using sacred geometry. That's what nanotechnology is. Or we can use it for understanding the patterns behind developing our consciousness, developing our energy field, really any aspect of life. So it's an absolutely fascinating field. I just recently released a 18-episode series on Gaia TV on sacred geometry, where I do my best to introduce people to like what this field really is and how remarkable it is and all the things it can apply to, bringing in things that they can make experiential, such as in the ancient world when they taught that you could create a particular pattern in your energy body, like what was known as the symbol of life in ancient Egypt, and then became known as the tree of life in the Jewish Kabbalistic tradition. If you actually, through using your consciousness and energy to construct that pattern in your energy body, it actually already exists, but through applying your attention to it, you start to crystallize it more quickly. It has all kinds of very beneficial aspects to our spiritual development, and even changes our spiritual destiny and our spiritual future. So that's the sacred geometry side. It's like the grand study of all these patterns, and that can be applied to virtually anything, gigantic field. BioGeometry is the specific body of work developed by my friend and teacher, Dr. Ibrahim Karim from Cairo, Egypt. And so Dr. Karim is an architect and an absolutely brilliant natural scientist. And so what he did is he looked at what is the energetic basis behind all living beings. Now, he had studied aspects of the ancient Egyptian sciences, what was taught in the ancient Egyptian temples. He has a very interesting background there, where he was trained by people like the person that ran the Museum of Ancient Egyptian Medicine. So he already had some background with this, but he also then found a body of work that was developed by French researchers in the early 1900s. And what the French researchers did is, just as we have the periodic table of elements in science today to identify every aspect of physical matter that exists, what the French did is they asked the question of what's above the electromagnetic spectrum and above the spectrum of physical matter, the periodic table, for what in classical traditions is referred to as life energy. In modern science and medicine, they say life energy doesn't exist. That's just a fantasy. It's nothing but mechanical, biochemical processes. It's all electromagnetic or physical. There's nothing else. But every classical tradition, including every classical healing tradition, is based on a level above the electromagnetic and physical, which might be called chi, ki, prana, ether, different names in different traditions. So they actually created a system through which they could detect and differentiate the qualities of energy at this higher dynamic life force level, the energies that are too subtle to be picked up by electromagnetic equipment, because our electromagnetic detectors can pick up electromagnetic energy around us, but they cannot pick up life energy in a reliable way. And so they created a system partly based on ancient Egyptian temple knowledge and techniques to be able to detect all these energies. Dr. Karim was introduced to this from some people in his circles in Egypt, and he realized this was a master key to being able to rediscover the ancient mysteries and to create a new form of them that we could apply today for practical work. Because as an architect, he needs to be able to design buildings that operate like a living being, that have energetic effects on living beings that are highly beneficial. And the French had broken open the doorway to the ancient Egyptian mysteries and all types of knowledge around the ancient world, and bring that into a modern context. Now, what the French did is they identified all these different qualities of energy that create different functions in living beings, including human beings. But there's another aspect that they left out that Dr. Karim knew had to be brought in, and that is the energy of the center. All these other energies with dynamic life energy are yin-yang type of energies. Some activate, some sedate. Some are more on the warming side or more cooling side. There are opposite polarities that allow us to move dynamically between conditions for living beings, because living beings are highly dynamic systems. But in the middle of all of that, in the center of all of that always, is a particular divine energy quality that harmonizes and balances all living energy fields for all living beings. That was not included in the French work, but Dr. Karim knew that this was absolutely essential. So he identified the quality of energy that harmonizes and balances all energy for all living beings. And so his system, while building on the French research, brought in something they didn't have, which is the understanding of this unified field energy, this core unity energy before it splits into duality. There's no opposite to this energy. This is the energy of the one, of the Godhead, of the divine plane, of the singularity in physics. Whatever you call it in your tradition, that's the state of the oneness, where everything is together and everything's balanced before it splits into duality. Things have to split into duality to create evolution, to create motion, to create dynamic activities. But it's that state of the one where everything is harmonized. So amazingly, Dr. Karim was able to create a practical, energetic system that anyone could learn to be able to detect this particular harmonized energy of the center and to be able to create it in any location on the earth, to be able to balance homes, offices, for people to use this to help balance the energy in their own energy field, all kinds of amazing things. So sacred geometry was this larger, multi-tradition understanding of the patterns behind creation, and biogeometry is the specific body of work coming from my teacher in Egypt, Dr. Ibrahim Karim, that has to do with what he calls nature's design language. And sometimes we'll define biogeometry as nature's design language of shape, sound, color, motion, number, angle, proportion, etc. It is the dynamic qualities that all life is based on.
All right. So now I've chosen Dr. Kim Deramo. And again, I stumbled across Kim somewhere on YouTube. And here was this ER doctor openly talking about her spirituality and her near-death-like experience she had and the teaching she now brings. And I was like, oh, I got to bring Kim on. And when she got on, she was just like this ball of energy and so positive, so just beautiful human being. And I really connected with Kim. And I think why I connected as well, there's a lot of similarities in our stories. I'm not a doctor, let's forget that bit. But in terms of some of our experiences from the mystical aspects, but then also that transition from Kim obviously had to gave up being an ER doctor to now teach and support people the way she does at a much deeper, more spiritual level. So for me, I was the same when I sold out of my company. It's like, how am I going to start to do this? And you've got to really lean into the vision and trust that and let your heart guide the way, basically, at the end of the day. So there was a lot of things with I felt Kim, we could certainly relate to each other when doing that. And she speaks so well. She's doing amazing things on the planet. And it was great to get to know her a little bit and have her on the podcast. Let's go over to Kim. The question that's screaming at me to ask you is at the moment then, because I had Gabo Mate on the podcast, and that prompted me to look into his work. And I've been studying a bit of his work on compassion. And he spoke about, he quoted a gentleman, I can't remember his name, but he spoke about biology. You can't separate the biology from the psychology, and you can't separate the psychology from the environment, and you can't separate the environment from spirituality, which I find fascinating. But in the medical industry, we literally just go all the way back and just keep it to the mechanical aspects and completely throw away the others. So at what point on your journey did you start to put two and two together? Because even when you were studying to be a medical doctor, you spoke about an autoimmune disease and things like that. And that started to happen. So I'm really fascinated about that part of your life as well.
Okay. So at time zero, that awakening experience, it was all revealed to me. It was all that I would later unpack and understand, but it was all there as far as how our consciousness creates our reality, and that's happening and showing up physically in the body, and that what we call disease is not an actual thing that has its own power and entity, but it's our power that we're putting into that thing, and that we can really allow disease to completely resolve and not be part of our reality. Okay. When I then was in medical school and had this autoimmune disease, but I didn't know it was an autoimmune disease. I just knew I was very sick. I couldn't figure what was wrong. I felt like crap. I had these chills and joint pain and fatigue, and it was a nightmare. And understanding mind body medicine, I tried to heal myself, mind over body, and it just made it worse. Everything got more complicated, more convoluted, and more intensified. And so once I then got like the right person and the right diagnosis, and here you go, we understand you have blah, 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 blah syndrome. Here's what you need to do. You're not going to be a runner anymore. You're going to have to control your environment. You're not going to probably be able to do medical school because I was going to live in a different hospital every month. And it went on and on and on about the solution. And that's when I broke free from the whole delusion. This is not my truth. This is where he lives, and that's okay. This is not true for me. And that's when I finally dropped in to listen deeply to life, to the wisdom that creates us, and to surrender and stop running away from my symptoms or trying to improve myself, overcome the problem, and let go. And the message really was, you don't need to fear yourself. I was afraid that I'd fail, or I'm not good enough. I need to keep going and push harder. And so my life came this like ongoing self-improvement program. And it was very intense. I was pushing. And that day was when I realized, I can let life live through me and be what I am. And that will emerge into the greatness that I'm looking for.
Wow. I heard you say the word surrender and let go in those sentences. Do you feel that's the key, that if we have some misalignment within the body, that we tend to push for it to be healed or fixed, and the fact that you kind of just let it all go was the defining shift?
Yes. The ailments were a result of my contraction and my closure, and where I was responding to life from the fear response. And they were actually just there to show me what that creates. And what does it create when I close? What does it create when I control? That's where you're going, so that I can make a new choice. And the truth is, when we so to let in source energy, because everything I learned about mind body medicine really was about what source energy can do in the body. If I open to source, it's got a handle. Boom, boom, boom. Rearrangement of the cellular and the genetics. I just didn't know how to do that. I thought I was going to heal myself. So the truth is, like, though, to come into that openness, to let more of source energy come through, to let more life force come through, requires that I let go, that I be surrendered, that I be, the virtues, right? Compassion for myself or for others. When we are in, the judgment and the closure and, cutthroat, I'm going to, get the highest grade or whatever that is, we're not in the virtue. We're in a lower frequency. So we're literally closing ourselves off from that life force.
So then when you went into becoming a medical doctor, were you armed with all this information, or was it something that's still progressively revealed itself? Because I'm fascinated as well. At what point were you sharing about your own journey as well? So there's two questions there, but yeah.
Yeah, and there's like 100 things. So in one way, there was already the clarity, but it unfolded, day by day, our life unfolds more of it. So we keep opening more to it. When I went to medical school, I went to an osteopathic medical school. So I learned about how the mind and body are connected, how the body heals itself, and how as within, so without, our consciousness affects our physical. It isn't true that, in osteopathic medicine, that necessarily gets really instilled. It's like a separate course over here. And then you have all your allopathic medicine and you're doing your work over here. So it's kind of gone in that direction, right? Because it got taken over by the institutional medical realm, because they don't want any doctors being that successful at healing in the institution. And so it was like, all right, if you're going to stay in this institution, you have to abide by, that's a corporate entity. And if people are healing, it doesn't feed the corporate entity. So the mainstream isn't going to be that. Okay. So here I am, but I did have that. And I think that was really the saving grace of all of it. So I learned a lot, and I did an extra year of fellowship in osteopathic medicine. And I worked with some master healers who could read what was going on across the room and help impact what was going on at that table across the room, who could put their hands on the patient and not only know what was going on, but witness the healing happening, and who taught me to do that, which I now understand so much more about what was happening. But when I came to interview at that medical school, I heard about these workshops and about these people doing things. And I thought, I didn't know we could do that. With everything I'd learned, I didn't know we could function that way. And I thought, this is where I want to be. So that was there. And then during residency, I was in a very, very allopathic residency, a level 1 trauma center, that's the hub where they send everything out. Some car crash in Florida would get sent to our hub in Atlanta. Any traumas, we had a lot of gunshot wounds and stab wounds and severe traumas. And this is where we were. But I had this developed gift already where I had done healing treatment and osteopathic treatment, and I'd had enough of a connection with it. So I'd always find people, whether it was through my yoga class or friends in my residency, who were like, I'm really interested in that. And so it was still fringy, but it kept it alive in my life. And there's no question that kept me going through and successfully completing that time in that residency. So I'd have these like sessions I would do for free, and we'd talk, and I'd get a huge read on everything that was really going on. And, yes, I know it seems like your anxiety disorder or your knee pain or your headaches, here's what's really going on. And then we would do the treatment, and people would have these incredible experiences. So I had that and some other pieces that were plugged in through those years. So that was definitely essential. And I think it kept me from getting consumed in that system, which wouldn't have happened for me because I knew my path, but it kept something alive in me. That was really the essential component.
Wow. I can't even really imagine what it would be like in that environment, seeing this conveyor belt of people coming through that are a product or a symptom of the systems that is already set up. And just that trauma and being around it, I can't compute. Beautiful. You're still with me? We're on to the last one. There was so many more I could choose. And I normally do only 5, but this one I had to squeak one more in, and I've thrown in Kashif Khan. And the reason being is because he was a great guy. And again, his analytical brain just blew my mind, and the way he could recall data of all things. And, he's got a book called The DNA Way, which I recommend as well. And this podcast was a little bit outside of what I normally do because most of the podcasts I cover are much deeply integrated in trauma, spirituality, near-death experiences, channeling, topics that I try and keep in the genre. Now, the moment I stray out of there and start talking about health or just breath work, they never seem to do so well in terms of people listening to them. So I'm mindful of that. But at the end of the day, this was a really important topic. And I'm from working in the health industry a long time. I'm so passionate that, we really got to look after this physical vehicle as well, through nutrition, through movement, through sleep, through gut health, through so many things. And Kashif brought something really fresh to the table about understanding our DNA and how we can start to support ourselves long term accordingly as well. Because I think then we get to really look after the physical, the mental, emotional, and the spiritual aspects of what it means to be whole human being, having these amazing human experiences and allowing ourselves to come from that place, living that way. Anyway, I digress. So pulling it back to Kashif, I did end up hitting him up though about Kundalini, about energy, and how that could affect potentially dormant DNA and that. So I was intrigued to hear about his aspects as well, which he was really happy to talk about and go there, and not just the material, physical stuff. So that's why I got Kashif in here. Anyway, let's go over to Kashif. So with cells, DNA, genetics, like I mentioned off air earlier, I had an awakening about 8-9 years ago, and I felt the level of energy go through my body that was quite remarkable, that I didn't even know the body was possible.
Yeah.
And between then and now, and incorporating many lifestyle factors, I've clearly felt a sensitivity or change when it comes to myself. I can't even put it into words unless people have experienced it. It's really hard to articulate that. Yeah. With everything you do, I'm just, even because I even hear the term junk DNA and what's I don't even know what the potential is. Is there any way, or is technology leading us to where we could start to measure those shifts as well, even like at levels of awareness within consciousness, within the body, within cells?
So there's a couple layers there. One is our DNA, our genes, which are the instructions. Mm-hmm. Those don't change. Right. But our epigenetics is constantly changing. And what is epigenetics? Is here's a gene, for example, that makes me convert my testosterone into estrogen. And maybe I have the fast version of that gene. So maybe as a woman, it's hard for me to lose weight and I have anxiety issues, right? Now, I know that there's certain supplements like DIM, for example, which is a broccoli extract, that actually slow the CYP19A1 gene down, right? So I can change its expression. I have the fast version, and by eating this food, it slows it down as if I had the slow version. And all of a sudden, my fat starts to melt. And all of a sudden, I don't have the anxiety. And my menstrual cycle is a little easier to deal with, right? That's genetic expression. But that requires constant management because you have a certain version of the gene and you have to constantly be adding this input of this ingredient to make it express slower, which means it's a daily ongoing supplement protocol.
Correct.
So that's how we experience things in the here and now every day. But we also have permanent inherited epigenetic expression changes. And a very famous example is the grandchildren of the Holocaust survivors that live in the US have this random and rare overexpression of neurochemicals around fear, trauma, and anxiety, which is still, they don't have the baseline genetic foundational issue. They're over and under expressing because that what their grandparents went through was so impactful that they inherited the genetic ability to cope with that. Their body is still designed to deal with that problem, which they're not in anymore. It's now give them that wiring and put them in an office. They all of a sudden seem neurotic. They seem overly sensitive, because they're wired for that and they're not doing that anymore. So those are the three layers: is genetics, hardwiring and code, epigenetics. I can tweak that. And that's all of what we've been talking about today. Let me augment things so I get to where I need to be. And then there's inherited epigenetic, which can be anything. It's whatever impactful, significant things your ancestors did. You're going to inherit the ability to cope with that without your DNA even changing. And why does it happen that way? Because it's not permanent. When you live your life differently, the expression changes back to give your next heirs what they need. Right?
Right.
That's the sort of, there's so much more you can talk about, but that's the sort of baseline.
Yeah. So what is junk DNA then?
It's basically empty code, like dead spots in the DNA. The funny thing is that there's a lot of it, right? So there's regions of genetics that are just not coded. So imagine you're reading a book and every second page is blank. And not only is it blank, but the story didn't continue. Like there's actually a page missing.
Okay.
Not just blank, right? So there's a bunch of junk DNA. We don't know what it does. We don't know why it's there. There's some theories in terms of if you look at our DNA, we have not changed for about 250,000 years. That means that our genetics has not evolved. There's no evolution been happening. It's just a random, sort of Russian roulette of here's different versions of these genes, and we keep getting different versions during different generations. But it always reverts back to the same 2 or 3 options, right? There's no change happening. It's just options. So the way that happened is 250,000 years ago, there was a change in our DNA, meaning that we used to be something else, and now we became who we are. And we today don't have the technology to do that, by the way. We don't know how to do that. But it's very clear there's a couple chromosomes that are like pinched and been augmented. How that happened, we don't know, but it happened. And we became who we are. And now all of a sudden we have wiring for people, our ancestor and lineage of 250,000 years. Our body still thinks we're like cave people, right? From that era. So now if you look at all that, you start to, ask more esoteric type questions like, where did we come from? Who are we? Right? Who programmed this in our DNA? All of a sudden we have the ability for complex speech and to feel in-depth emotions and sing, and our brains folded so that there's more surface area and we could have more intellect than other species. This kind of just happened. And evolution doesn't happen that way. Right? So where and why, I'm working on that now, but I don't know if in my lifetime there'll be an answer, but there's certainly more than what we think.
Yeah, without a doubt. So there you have it. That's the best of 2023. There's so many more. Like I said, I could have fitted in there. But look, at the end of the day, I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to let me know if you did, especially if on YouTube. Let me know in the comments. Otherwise, I don't know. Anyway, what was the other thing I want to say? If you have been listening, if you're a regular listener to my podcast and the supporter, I appreciate it and I appreciate you. I just want you to know that even though I have not met you in person, probably not, unless you've been to one of our workshops and retreats, which I have. And if you have, I truly hope our work has certainly supported you on your own spiritual growth as well, moving forward. So there you have it. Here's to 2024. Who knows what's to come? My son was born last week, my second child. It's full on here. I managed to sneak in and record this for you guys and for myself. Yeah, wild, huh? What a trip. Anyway, I really hope to meet you in person. If you do, make sure you come up. I'm a hugger, so give me a hug, okay, in 2024. And yeah, if you can't make it to a workshop and retreat, that's okay too. We do online stuff, by the way. I never talk about it much on the podcast, but we actually hold space every month. Like tomorrow night, for instance, I'm actually holding a healing circle online on Zoom, where we all get together and send and receive energy. They're absolutely powerful and beautiful. So if any of that tickles your fancy, check out livingflow.co. We've got a membership over there as well. Anyway, have an amazing festive season, or if it's 2024, have an amazing year. Live from your heart. Be bold, be courageous, be strong, be vulnerable, be whatever it is. But be you. That's the most important thing. Be authentic. And yeah, much love. See you soon.